Hello, it's Annette here, and you're very welcome. Have you ever had the feeling that your difficult childhood didn't just stay in the past, that somehow it followed you into your adult life? Not just in painful memories, but in how you feel, how you think, how you behave, and sometimes even in your body. This is something I didn't understand in my own life for a long time. In fact, for many years, I berated myself that I couldn't seem to get over my childhood. It just followed me from one decade to the next, no matter how much I tried to deal with it. I just couldn't find a way to stop it invading my adult life until my 40s, when I finally met a therapist called Pat O'Connor. And he was able to explain to me why I was still stuck. I'm forever grateful to this therapist, as working with him marked the beginning of my healing. I learned something that I wished I had learned many years earlier, but I guess it's better late than never. Healing felt great. Healing set me free from my toxic childhood controlling my adult life. Healing allowed me understand that I had no control over my childhood following me into my adult life, as this happens at a subconscious level. It was so healing to learn this, as I was able to forgive myself for how my adult life had turned out. Healing allowed me drop the heavy load of shame I constantly carried around with me for how my adult life had turned out. You see, my adult life, it had just been a series of disasters, and I felt so ashamed of this. There were most of my friends and colleagues in settled lives, all thriving, and there was I with a history of breakups in my relationships and other upheavals and catastrophes. I just felt such a failure compared to everyone, even though I felt I was doing my very best at life. Healing led me to set up this channel, as I want others who had a tough childhood to heal too. I want others who feel shame as to how their lives have turned out to drop the shame. As when you listen to this video, you will see that if you had a toxic childhood, it is very likely that your adult life will follow this path. But, and this is the important bit, you are not in control of this happening, as it is all done at a subconscious level. Now, this is a good time to explain how I came up with the title for my book and this YouTube channel. And the title is, Your Childhood is Over. No, it's not. I remember when I was in my 30s, I was speaking to a professional. I was talking about an incident from my childhood that was still hurting me. So there I was, pouring my heart out, when this professional sat back in the chair, got all cozy, and then proceeded to shout at me, "Your childhood is over, move on." I remember feeling completely shocked. I was stunned. I was so ashamed that I couldn't move on from my childhood. So I didn't argue with them. I didn't respond. But something about what they shouted at me, it didn't sit right. And I never went back to this person. Because the truth was, my childhood didn't feel over. It was still there in how I felt about myself, how I made important life choices and decisions, and how overall I experienced my life. But it wasn't until years later, when I met that therapist, Pat O'Connor, that I mentioned earlier, that I began to understand why this was. He introduced me to two concepts. The first one was the concept of how I developed a really harsh inner critic, resulting from the damaged core beliefs I had learned in my childhood. I call these damaged core beliefs the 6 bad messages. And they are: I am not enough. I am responsible for others. I can't trust my feelings or my instincts. I am bad and I am wrong. I am alone. Nobody loves me. And lastly, I must be perfect or nobody will love me. These damaged core beliefs are what we subconsciously feed ourselves all the time, and they result in us having no self-confidence and no trust in ourselves. The second concept he introduced me to is called repetition compulsion. And this can be explained as follows. Children learn what they live. What a child learns becomes their normal. It is what is familiar to them, and as adults, we are subconsciously wired, are programmed, are compelled to gravitate towards what feels normal and familiar for us, even when it hurts us. I have videos explaining each of these concepts in more detail in the pinned comment below. So, when you combine these two concepts, this is what happens. When you become an adult, your toxic childhood experience sadly results in you having no self-confidence, and you also gravitate to what feels normal for you, and sadly again, this normal is toxic, just like your childhood was. And then without realizing it, because both these concepts operate at a subconscious level in your adult life, you can find yourself ending up in situations that result in the same painful emotional patterns just like you experienced in your difficult childhood. Be it with different people or different circumstances, different situations, you still end up with the same hurtful feelings you felt in your childhood, just repeating over and over, and the same letdowns, just repeating over and over. And when I began to understand why this happens, something became very clear to me. My childhood wasn't over. It had subconsciously followed me into my adult life, and because this was subconscious, I had no control over this, and therefore I did not need to feel shame anymore for how my adult life had turned out. My childhood had subconsciously invaded my adult life, and no matter how hard I tried to do my best in life, I kept feeding myself the 6 bad messages, and I kept repeating the toxic patterns that I learned in my childhood. And that is why the name of my book and this channel is Your Childhood is Over. No, it's not. Because for me and for many people, our difficult or abusive childhoods don't just simply stay in the past. And there's another part of this that can feel even harder to hear. And it is, research has shown that people who have had difficult or stressful childhoods can be at a higher risk of developing certain chronic health problems. Things like chronic pain, chronic respiratory illnesses, and other stress-related conditions. I understand this not just at a professional level, but also personally, as I have lived with chronic neuropathic pain for many years. Now, it is very important to say this clearly. Developing a chronic illness does not happen to everyone. There are many factors involved in this developing. And it's about an increased risk of developing a chronic illness, not a certainty. But even knowing that people who had an abusive childhood have an increased risk of developing a chronic illness, even just knowing this, it's very difficult to hear and it's very difficult to accept. So where does this leave us? It can end up with us thinking this. It wasn't just that I suffered as a child, but the suffering has followed me into my adult life emotionally and possibly physically. And this is not fair. Why do I have to suffer twice? In my childhood and now in my adult life. And if you feel sad when you think about this, or even angry, that makes complete sense because it is unfair. It is unfair that a person has to go through a tough childhood and then that childhood can then invade their adult life, not just emotionally, but sometimes physically too. So, if this is what you are feeling as you listen to this, I want you to know this. There is nothing wrong with you for feeling this way. This is a very human response to a difficult situation, genuinely difficult situation. But there's also this part which I want you to know because it's really important. What you learned can be unlearned. Those damaged core beliefs, the 6 bad messages that you learned about yourself, they're not facts. They are not the truth about who you really are. Because here is the truth about who you really are. You are enough. You are not responsible for other adults. You are allowed to trust your feelings and your instincts. You are not bad and you are not wrong. You are not alone. People do love you. And lastly, you don't need to be perfect for others to love you. The 6 bad messages were formed when you were trying to survive in a difficult environment, when you were a child. And with awareness, with understanding, and with practice, you can stop the 6 bad messages controlling what you think about yourself. I did this by what I now call the nip and flip method. And the video for my nip and flip method will appear on the screen at the end of this video. Now, the same is true for those toxic patterns I talked about that you learned in your childhood. Just because a toxic pattern has repeated time and time again in your adult life, it doesn't mean it has to keep repeating forever. When you become aware that you are repeating bad patterns you subconsciously learned in your difficult childhood, you then have the choice to stop doing this. And I hope this is where this channel can help you, as it is giving you an awareness that you may be subconsciously feeding yourself the 6 bad messages, and you may be subconsciously repeating those toxic patterns you learned in your childhood. In my life, the first step in my healing began when the therapist, Pat O'Connor, when he gave me an awareness that these 2 subconscious processes were operating in my life. So I worked out that awareness is the first step to healing from a difficult childhood. When you bring both of these subconscious processes into your conscious mind through awareness, you then have control over them, as we can control what is in our conscious mind. And even when it comes to the body, nothing is fixed, because the body can respond to making good changes to a better lifestyle, to reducing the risks of possible illness, and to making sure we take time to recover after an injury or after an illness. So yes, it is important to acknowledge the full picture. That a difficult childhood can follow us into our adult lives, but it is just as important to hold on to this. This is not the end of the story. If you are only beginning to become aware and to learn about the 6 bad messages and repetition compulsion, please be gentle with yourself. You do not have to understand everything at once. And you do not have to make changes all at once. But when you are ready, healing is possible. And this is why I am here for you. This is why I set up this channel. I want to support you when you are ready to begin the process of healing. I am here to help you become aware of the subconscious control that the 6 bad messages and repetition compulsion can have in your life. With this awareness, you get your control back. You get to control them. And by doing this, you can stop your difficult childhood invading your adult life. And it can be done. I've done it. In my own healing, I worked out that there are 3 steps to do this, and I will let my 3 dogs, who I call the 3 wise tales, 2 of them are here, the other one's sitting on the ground. I let them explain these 3 steps to you. And yes, it is unfair that a difficult childhood not only ruins your childhood, but it can also invade your adult life. But we are not going to stay victims. We are going to learn how to heal. So on this channel, when you're ready, I welcome you to awareness and I welcome you to healing. And now I will hand you over to the 3 wise tales, Petal, Blossie and Dottie. And they're going to show you the 3 ways to break free from the 6 bad messages and repetition controlling your adult life. Thank you for listening and I hope this helps. And now on to the 3 wise tales.
Hello, my name is Petal and I am the first of the 3 wise tales. Today we're going to show you the 3 ways to break free from the control of 2 toxic hidden forces. They are the 6 bad messages and repetition compulsion. Please see the videos suggested at the end for a more detailed explanation of these 2 forces. The 2 forces of the 6 bad messages and repetition compulsion go hand in hand. They feed into each other. When these 2 forces run our lives, subconsciously, we are not in control. Our subconscious minds are in control. Therefore, we are not the top dog. We are just a cog, trapped inside the toxic machinery of these 2 forces. So that's why the first way to heal is awareness. Now that you are here, look at it like this, listening to this, you are already becoming aware, and this is wonderful. Awareness means you start to look at your adult patterns, realizing now for the first time that you are forced to repeat your toxic and abusive childhood situations, and again knowing for the first time that it is not your fault that you do this, so you are not to blame yourself. Awareness means you start to control what you think about yourself. You get to decide what messages you tell yourself. Do you want to feed yourself bad messages, or do you want to feed yourself good messages? The moment you become aware that you are being controlled by these 2 toxic forces, they no longer control you. You control them as you have moved them from your subconscious mind to your conscious mind. And remember, we can control what is in our conscious mind. Awareness moves you out of being a helpless cog and starts to put you in the position of top dog. Awareness opens the door to making fantastic, conscious changes in your life, and these changes will at last stop you landing yourself in toxic and abusive situations. And now I'll hand you over to Blossie. He's going to explain to you the second way to break free from the control of these 2 toxic, sinister, hidden forces.
Hello, my name is Blossie, and I am the second of the 3 wise tales. I am very old, so these days I have a long white beard. But being very old doesn't just mean I have a hairy face. It also means I am very wise, and I am so happy to share this wisdom with you. Now let me tell you why the second way to heal is so important. Most people who grew up in toxic or abusive homes were never taught to trust their feelings or instincts. In fact, they were often taught the opposite. If they ever dared to speak up and give their opinion on something, or if they ever expressed how they felt about something, they were often told, "Oh, you're too sensitive," or "You're just imagining things," or "Oh, don't be so dramatic," or "Will you keep your opinions to yourself and don't make trouble?" Over time, they learned to disconnect from their feelings and their instincts, and in doing this, they disconnected from their inner warning system. And that inner warning system, your feelings and your instincts, it is your natural defense system. When you don't trust your instincts, you can't protect yourself. And when you can't protect yourself, you will be easily exploited by toxic and abusive people. That's how repetition compulsion keeps you as a cog. You keep walking back into toxic relationships. You keep tolerating mistreatment. You keep overriding the feeling that says, this doesn't feel right. I should be away from this. But when you start to listen to your feelings and trust your instincts, everything changes. Your instincts sense danger before your thoughts even catch up. Trusting your feelings and your instincts means you start choosing safety. You start choosing yourself. You start saying no to toxic and abusive situations. And every time you listen to that inner voice, you step out of the machinery. You stop being a cog and you become the top dog. You become the boss of your life. Because top dogs protect themselves. Top dogs listen to their inner voices. Top dogs don't abandon themselves just to keep the peace. Top dogs protect themselves from toxic and abusive situations. So today, no more being a cog. Today, you start being the top dog. And now, let me hand you over to Dottie. She's going to tell you the third way to break free from the control of repetition compulsion and the 6 bad messages.
Hello, my name is Dottie, and I am the third of the 3 wise tales. I am the queen of the pack. I'm the entertainer. I keep everyone happy. So I am definitely the top dog in this house. Now listen closely, because this final step is powerful. The 6 bad messages didn't come from nowhere. They came from having to survive a tough childhood. And here's the truth. The 6 bad messages are not facts. They are lies you learned. So, the third way to heal is to nip and flip the bad messages. You catch a bad message, you nip it in the bud, you don't give it airtime, you don't entertain it. Then you flip it to the truth about yourself. You flip the bad message about yourself to a good message about yourself. So, you are not enough becomes I am enough exactly as I am. You are responsible for others, adults, becomes I am only responsible for myself. You are alone becomes no, I'm not alone. I matter and I belong and lots of people love me. Now, you might say, Dottie, that's so obvious. But it isn't obvious, as we are feeding ourselves these bad messages from our subconscious minds. Therefore, we don't even know we are doing this. But when we nip and flip, we bring the bad message into our awareness, into our conscious mind. And by doing this, we are in control. And we can now retrain our minds to believe the truth, to believe the good messages. So, every time you nip and flip, you take your power back, because top dogs choose their thoughts. Top dogs choose to feed themselves good messages about themselves. Top dogs choose to ignore the lying, nasty, bad messages. Top dogs are no longer cogs. So today, me, Petal, Blossie and Annette, we want to tell you this. You are not alone. You really do matter. And we are all here together learning to have better lives. We really care about you. And one last thing. The 3 wise tales, we have a very important good message to tell you. We want to tell you that we really